Pope Leo XIV has been formally installed at the Vatican. What do his first moves tell us about his papacy and how to read them? Plus, we'll talk about those plummeting global birth rates, all on this edition of Prayerful Posse. Welcome to Arroyo Grande series, the Prayerful Posse, where we dive into matters of faith and its impact on culture. Let's convene the posse. Father Gerald Murray, canon lawyer of the Archdiocese of New York, and Robert Royal, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Go subscribe to the Arroyo Grande podcast on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube at Arroyo Grande Show so you don't miss an episode of the posse. Gents, Pope Leo XIV made it official this week as he received the pallium. That is, of course, that round woolen collar that represents his authority as Pope, and the fisherman's ring with St. Peter's image on it. This was a very emotional moment. I mean, to my eyes, you could see Leo absorbing the enormity of this office and the weight of it. Father, what did you make of that moment? And put this in context for those who might not be Catholic. I'll put up the footage of the Pope before Mass descending into the tomb of St. Peter's. What does this mean, and whose office is he really assuming here?
Yeah, the Pope is the successor of St. Peter, so he is literally taking up that burden, as he described it, the cross and the mission that Christ gave to Peter. And Peter was given the task to, shepherd the flock, to confirm the brethren in the faith, and then to bear his own crosses. So it's a very weighty office, aside from the, billion plus Catholics in the world. He's now answering to God for the souls of all those people. So I was very moved to see how much it meant to him, because he's assuming an office that no man ever believed would go to him. I'm sure he never really thought it himself, and here he is. It's divine providence at work.
Yeah, it was incredible to watch, I have to say. Bob, before I get into what the Pope said, and there's plenty to unpack, and we will, that name Leo is a callback, if you will, to Pope Leo XIII, who was Pope from 1879 to 1903. Why is the new Pope referencing Pope Leo XIII? And how does that landmark encyclical, Rerum Novarum, factor into this, do you think?
Well, Rerum Novarum is often said to be the encyclical that inaugurated modern Catholic social thought. In other words, it faced the fact that there were secular states. In the past, of course, there had been confessional states. It faced the fact that there was now this industrial revolution, this urbanization, people moving off the land. Throughout most of history, most people lived on the land as agricultural workers. So it was a whole new movement. And if you want to kind of, in a nutshell, get an image of what he was facing, you read Charles Dickens, right? These people who are in cities and they're subject to drunkenness and drugs and prostitution and all that. So he knew that there was something that had to be done because of the social situation. Now, Leo, I think, reached back because I think he quite rightly recognizes that we are in a new moment, that even as good as Rerum Novarum was in its day, we've got a much more difficult problem. And it's that, even just being on screens is another abstraction that takes people out of what they used to be in the past. Or the fact that we don't really have communities or institutions that we trust very much. So my guess would be, and it can only be a guess at this point, that by taking on that name, what he's signaling is we're in a new moment, just as Leo was in that new moment at the end of the 19th century, and we need to rethink the Church's teaching about how we live well in our own time.
Father, I know Leo XIII revived Thomism, the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas, and applied much of that to the modern age. What distinguishes that school of thought from other theologies? I mean, for those who are not familiar at all with Thomas Aquinas or Leo XIII.
Yes, well, he lived in a time in which the Church was facing the challenge of rationalism and other forms of relativism, we could say. It had been, since the French Revolution and the associated thinkers, there'd been a great suspicion cast upon the ancient wisdom and the, let's say, objective view of reality. It was much more subjectivism involved. And I know Bob can talk about this very eloquently. He studied the question. Yeah. But no, Thomistic theology and philosophy which were based on Aristotle and the Holy Scriptures and the natural law, they were an attempt to ground the church's teaching in an eternal wisdom that the church distilled from Revelation and the thinking of this brilliant saint. But I'll toss the ball to Bob. He can really talk about this, I know.
Okay, Bob, take over and talk a little bit about that Augustinian tradition of which Robert Prevost, the new pope, is. I mean, he led that community for many years.
Yeah, Father had it basically right. The Thomistic tradition is a more kind of rational tradition. In other words, it does a kind of logical analyses of different propositions. And after Leo published his encyclical Aeterni Patris, there was this tremendous explosion within the Catholic Church and actually outside the Catholic Church of studying Thomas Aquinas, places like the University of Chicago and Princeton and Harvard and other places as well. Leo the 14th comes at these things from an Augustinian standpoint. And if you've ever read Augustine's Confessions, he's a very passionate soul.
Yes.
He's a Platonist as opposed to an Aristotelian. He doesn't so much give you rational analyses in the way that Thomas does, like these formulaic analyses, but there is a rational analysis, but it's based on a person who's striving to know God, to live a godly life. And I just wrote a column the other day.
Yes, you did. I saw it. I read it. It was great.
Pope Benedict XVI used to quote this line from Augustine, "O daquo jubis Domine et jubis quod vid." So give what you order, God, and order whatever you wish. So there's Augustine struggling with his sexual urges and his doubts and whatnot, and he knows that only God can give him what he needs. So we've got both of those traditions in the church, and it's great that at this moment in history we've got a pope, I think, who understands both of them.
Yeah, and it's trying to impart them in a new way. I mean, in the homily, Pope Leo mentioned St. Augustine, who wrote, "Lord, you've made us for yourselves, and our heart is restless until we rest in you." And so I love that was his opening of the homily the other day. Father, the other thing he said during that homily, the cardinals came together, he said, to, quote, elect the new successor of Peter, the Bishop of Rome, a shepherd capable of preserving the rich heritage of the Christian faith and at the same time looking to the future in order to confront the questions, concerns, and challenges of today's world. I was chosen without any merit of my own, and now, with fear and trembling, I come to you as a brother who desires to be the servant of your faith and your joy, walking with you on the path of God's love, for he wants us to be united in one family, love and unity. These are the two dimensions of the mission entrusted to Peter by Jesus. Boy, is this a new era or what, Father? And what are you making of that preserving the rich heritage of the Christian faith and the titles he invoked?
No, it was beautiful. When I heard that, I was really moved because it summarizes the mission of the church. Unity and love are united, and St. Augustine understood that. The whole problem that he saw with original sin was that people had disordered loves, that they loved the wrong thing, and it was unto their destruction. Whereas if you love God, then you find God. And in fact, I'm struck, one of the things that we learned in the seminary was Augustine's line, "Lord, I would not be searching for you if I had not already found you," which for me is the summary of human psychology when it comes to eternal questions. We know there's something more to us, and in a sense, we've already found it, but we still haven't found it enough. So for me, when the Pope said, let's look back at the tradition to confront modern problems, he's rooting it precisely what St. Augustine is saying. Ordered love God and neighbor, and then try to draw from it solutions to current questions.
Bob, the Pope called for unity in the church 7 times. He said, brothers and sisters, I would like that our first great desire be for a united church, a sign of unity and communion, which becomes a leaven for a reconciled world. In this our time, we still see so much discord, too many wounds caused by hatred, violence, prejudice, and fear of difference, and an economic paradigm that exploits the earth's resources and marginalizes the poorest. For our part, we want to be a small leaven of unity, communion, and fraternity within the world. We want to say to the world with humility and joy, look to Christ, come closer to Him. What is he saying here, Bob? And how did the last Pope do you think, shape this message?
Well, his papal motto is in illo uno unum, in that one, in other words, in God, we are one. Because we're going to be diverse. I mean, a church is a unity, yes, a unity in love, but it's going to be a unity in diversity, in legitimate diversity, of course, because there are going to be Augustinians, there are going to be Dominicans, there are going to be Franciscans, there are going to be lay people, there are going to be consecrated virgins. I mean, there are all sorts of different vocations in the Catholic Church. The unity is in Christ himself, in God himself, and in the tradition. I was very happy that he talked about how looking back in the tradition, because some people misunderstand what a tradition is. By definition, a tradition is to take something and bring it forward. Take the truths there, not leave them behind, but use those as we do in our own lives, what's good in our previous life to grow further. So I think that's a tremendous statement that he made. Pope Francis talked a lot about unity. He seemed to deliver a lot of division and exacerbate some of the divisions that already existed. We'll have to see how this plays out with Leo XIV, but it's a darn good way to begin a papacy.
Father, there was a moment that made me sit up. Here's the quote from the homily. Peter must shepherd the flock without ever yielding to the temptation to be an autocrat, lording it over those entrusted to him. On the contrary, he's called to serve the faith of his brothers and sisters and to walk alongside them, for all of us are living stones, called through our baptism to build God's house in fraternal communion. And he goes on and on. What did you make of that line there, Father, about the temptation to be an autocrat? It leapt out at me.
Yes, well, it is the temptation because the Pope in reality is a monarch. He doesn't answer to anyone except God. He's not dependent on the people or judiciary, as the President of the United States has to answer to the Senate and courts. Right. So what I got from that was he realizes there's a danger when you have supreme authority to use it in a way that is unreflective and harmful. And the way you get out of that dilemma is by consultation and listening. And by all accounts, he listens well. Now, listening just doesn't mean talking to the person next to you. Listening means reading deeply in the tradition of the church to understand what the most, the best and the brightest, we could say, of Christian history have talked about questions that come up. We have a whole history of theology and reflection on the very problems that are plaguing modern society. Bob referred to St. Augustine. You want to talk about sexual morality and ethics, reflect on him. Right. He has a lot to say about it. And as regards economics, St. Thomas wrote a lot about the social order and the duties that we have each in our roles in society. So, walking together is something Pope Francis talked a lot about. But unfortunately, he often walked alone because he put people aside. He didn't want to talk, for instance, to the cardinals who raised the dubia. He didn't want to talk to the Latin Mass people. I think Pope Francis' legacy of saying we have to walk together is going to be lived in a new way by Pope Leo.
Bob, Austin Ivory, who was Pope Francis's biographer and pal, he took after me this week because when I read that excerpt from the homily, I said, in an apparent reference to his predecessor, Pope Leo said this about the temptation to be an autocrat. Look, it's an open secret. Many of the cardinals going into conclave told us on the right, left, and in the middle, they thought Francis was an autocrat, the way he actually governed in the church.
Yeah, and it's quite obvious. I mean, we've talked before about how he would appoint cardinals just because he happened to meet somebody one day and they're from Mongolia or they're kind of out of the way in Australia or someplace. And it wasn't only on those sort of capricious matters. I mean, there were some very serious things that he did on his own that in the past there would have been consultation with, say, nuncios in particular countries or, experts within the Roman Curia who he would consult with and then make decisions about.
Right.
It's an interesting fact about Leo, that Pope Leo XIV, that he wrote his dissertation at the Angelicum about obedience within Augustinianism. So even as a 30-year-old, I haven't read it, but Thomas Joseph White, who's the rector of the Angelicum, an American who's a friend and a very, very astute theologians that he's read it, and he was very, very mature already at 30 years old. So he was thinking about, how much obedience do we have to give to an authority? When does an authority step over the line? All that, I think, is to the good, and we'll see how it actually plays out practically, of course, but he's been thinking about this for a long time.
Yeah. Father, the Pope had a meeting, Pope Leo, with Centesimus Annus group, and he said something interesting about doctrine. Here's the quote. In the case of the Church's social doctrine, we need to make clear that the word doctrine has another more positive meaning, without which dialogue itself would be meaningless. Doctrine, on the other hand, as a serious, serene, and rigorous discourse, aims to teach us primarily how to approach problems and, even more importantly, how to approach people. It also helps us to make prudential judgments when confronted with challenges. Father, tell me about this notion of doctrine and rigor.
Yes, well, I love this response because one of in the ecumenical movement, which is supposed to draw Christians closer together, there's a wing of thought which says doctrines divide man from man. Therefore, doctrines are the obstacle to unity. And the response of the church has always been, Jesus Christ said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And the second, the truth, refers specifically to the doctrine he taught. God himself speaking is the one who instructs his people on what to believe, how to live, how to treat their neighbors. So I thought this was very refreshing because, sad to say, in the last pontificate, people who appealed to doctrine were often criticized by Pope Francis as being obstructionists, backwardists, all kinds of epithets. Where he rigorous, for instance. Yeah, and you say to yourself, the word consistency is something we love to apply to thinkers and speakers. But consistency is the positive way of saying, well, somebody's obstinate in what they talk about. Well, obstinacy is not the question. Consistency in conveying the truth of Christ, that's what I think Pope Leo's getting to.
Yeah. Bob, at the same time when he met with interreligious leaders, he told them this just the other day. Synodality and ecumenism are closely linked. I wish to assure you of my intention to continue Pope Francis's commitment to promoting the synodal character of the Catholic Church and to develop new and concrete forms for an ever more intense synodality in the ecumenical field, end quote. Your reaction to that? Some of the Gregorians out there are saying, this is it. He's going to continue synodality. Francis goes on.
Well, I mean, it could. I'd be very surprised, given everything else we've been talking about and everything else we know, if that is the case. It's an interesting thing. Cardinal Marx, who's one of the radical cardinals in Germany, was interviewed by a German paper the other day, and even he said, who knows what synodality means? And that there's going to probably be some change in the way that we approach this. It kind of petered out after those 3 years under Pope Francis. He set, as we've talked about before, he set this ecclesial assembly for 2028, which is so far in the future, you have to think, wow, he doesn't really want to deal with this right away. But I would not be surprised if he begins to use that term in a different way and to try to find something more substantial, more consistent, as Father rightly says. I don't like the fact that he's using that term because I think it already carries with it a lot of baggage. And I'm a little bit worried about this ecumenical outreach that in the previous papacy sat again to say it kind of faded off almost into near universalism, that all religions are paths to God. But let's give him a chance. Let's see what he does with it. I always think back to a book of Jacques Maritain called Distinguish to Unite. And when we have clear distinctions, it's actually better. When we're kind of groping around in the dark, we don't know what everybody's agitated. They don't know what they're doing. When you have some clear decisions that are made and concrete steps that you're going to take, people feel a lot calmer and they kind of know what to do next. And I would like to see some of that built into synodality if we're going to retain that term.
Yeah, well, if synodality means listening and talking to people, and he's confining it to the ecumenical sphere, talking to other faiths, maybe that's a very radically different vision than Pope Francis had, but as you said, we'll have to wait and see. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with his Vatican counterpart, as did the Vice President this past week, and the new Pope. And Rubio suggested that Ukrainian and Russian officials might consider meeting at the Vatican to negotiate a settlement. He said, I think it's a place that both sides would be comfortable going. Now, President Trump apparently is communicating that those negotiations may go forward. Father, why is the Vatican the place, the ideal place maybe, to have these negotiations?
Well, the Vatican and the Pope represent moral authority, and it represents a true desire for peace on the part of the shepherd of the flock. It's already been demonstrated when Pope Francis died that at the funeral, Zelensky and President Trump met. It was one of the most amazing photos I've ever seen in my life. Two chairs brought together in, near the baptistry in St. Peter's Basilica. No, I think the Vatican, it's a reminder too for believers, which, also affects non-believers, that those who believe in God think they owe it to God to stop wars. It's atheists who view war as just another tool in the toolbox to accomplish their ends. So I hope this works.
Yeah. Yeah, Bob, do you want to comment on that? I heard J.D. Vance saying the Vatican represents soft power, but it's much more than that, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Look, one of the problems, it seems to me, is that the Russian Orthodox have had a burr under the saddle about Catholicism for a long time, especially about the Pope. But if you look around the world, where is the place going to be where this negotiation can take place? If you look at any particular country, it's got its own history and its own relationship to America and to Ukraine and to Russia. And so at the very least, what we could say is that the Vatican is a kind of a neutral corner and can maybe be a neutral broker. This Pope has already taken a very different stance toward Ukraine. He's very much more pro-Ukrainian. Ukraine obviously has been invaded by another country. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm still a bit surprised that this has happened. But in those conversations, maybe some things have gotten started. You've got a new person. You've got a person who understands America because he is an American. And maybe, just maybe, that opens up enough space that we can make some progress on this very difficult, almost intractable war.
Well, and I think Pope Francis lost a little steam just as a diplomat when you'll remember, he called the Russian patriarch and said he was Putin's altar boy. That I know ticked off the Russians. So maybe with a new man in the papacy, it changes the math a bit more and brings down whatever hard feelings there were there. There's a recent story in the USA Today, shifting to some cultural matters. Birth rates are close to an historic low. Births have declined 2% a year from 2015 and 2020. The United States is now below replacement level at 2.1 children per woman. Father, I see this as a lack of faith in the future and even in oneself. What's the role of religion and faith here?
Well, there are a lot of factors leading to this. A couple of that I come right to mind: the use of contraception, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, marrying later. If you marry at age 20 to 25, more likelihood you'll have more children than if you married age 35 to 40. So I think that's a problem. You're right about faith, lack of faith in the future. It's also a downside of materialism, which was denounced so eloquently by John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis. If people say, I will have children when I'm comfortable, you're never comfortable. You had to have children and then make yourself comfortable by working harder. Now, I'll shift it to the man who has children because I'm the observer. He can give us the on the ground. Both of you.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely vouch for that. There's no good time, but when they come, it's the perfect time. Bob, my favorite statistic in this piece, this USA Today piece, was among all 236 countries, the Central African Republic has the highest rate in the world at 45.35 births per 1,000 people, and the Vatican city-state has the lowest at 4.21 births per 1,000 people, which I think is an important and probably good statistic. But Bob, this is a huge impact it has huge impacts on welfare programs and the solidity of a country.
Yeah, I mean, and not only that, I mean, as Elon Musk has said, if you have these low birth rates in 3 generations, your country is basically done. And you can't replace your native population by bringing in people from from elsewhere. And look, this is a really difficult problem. Everything that Father mentioned is I think the crux, because it's a cultural and an ethical and a spiritual problem more than it is anything else. There are several countries that have tried, for example, Hungary has been very aggressive in trying to promote births. And so they provide lavish subsidies to women who have children. I think after third or fourth children, you don't pay income tax any longer for the rest of your life. And it hasn't really worked. It's helped a little bit, but it's not primarily an economic problem. That's the kind of thing that, our mainstream media and our think tanks, they all kind of view things in political and economic terms. At bottom, this is a human problem. It is a spiritual and a moral and just a kind of a cultural sense of what kind of people live without children going into the future. I mean, I look at my grandkids and I say, I have to redouble my efforts because God help us, if we don't change things, the world that they're going to live in is even worse than the one that we're in.
Yeah, but what it's important, I think, Bob, to sell young people. I tell young men, and I'm looking at my co-collaborator here on so many of our efforts, and he's a young man. He got married young. He's having his first child. I tell everybody I know, have your children, have them young. You will find your purpose, and God will reveal to you what your life is for. I mean, that's what childhood did. I mean, having children did. It opened up so many artistic vistas and parts of life that I would never have had access to. So if you're young, if you like that girl, if you love her, marry her and have a bunch of kids. That would be my advice. Another development, Father Robert Mehlhart, he is the president of the Pontifical Institute of Sacred Music at the Vatican. He posted a video this week that went viral. This is a little taste.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Suddenly, chant and Latin are cool again, Father. What do you make of this? Teaching people how to sing at Mass with the Pope, who I guess has brought Latin back.
Well, God bless the Pope for his beautiful Latin. There's no doubt about it. I heard him, of course, from the Loggia and these beautiful praying of Latin. No, Latin represents mystery. It used to be the lingua franca of the Western world. Then it became basically the language of the church. It is a mystery to people, but it's an attractive mystery because they know that Latin chant is a union between God and man, and it's an attempt to beautify words that have a great resonance in and of themselves. So, we always kind of underestimate the effect that art has on people without them even knowing it.
Yes.
And I think we have to remind ourselves, just bringing a kid into a museum and exposing him to opera or Gregorian chant, it opens up a vista. Life is not about simply what I see and hear on the everyday street. There's more to life.
Yeah. It again, mystery. I don't know who said it. It might have been Pope Leo in his previous incarnation as Robert Prevost, but I think he said we have to temper spectacle with mystery. We have spectacle all around us, but mystery is lacking. Bob, do you want to speak to that before we jump into the next story?
What he said, I think this was in 2012.
Yeah.
The church can't expect to use the tools of spectacle to get to the depth and the mysteries that exist in our tradition. I mean, as Father rightly says, it's these almost intangible things that kind of enter into you unconsciously. I remember I took my oldest daughter one time when she was about 10 or 11 to the Brompton Oratory in London to a high Latin Mass. And she walked out. She was a very musical and artistic kid. And we walked out and she said to me, "Dad, was the Mass like that all the time when you were a kid?" It just overwhelmed her. She had never seen anything like that. And she'd been going to Mass ever since she was a kid. So yeah, this stuff. And we're kind of detecting that the Pope likes this and he's trying to promote it. And let's just hope it catches fire because we desperately need it in our Western liturgies.
Yeah, well, I also hope that Chartres pilgrimage, which is thousands of young people who go out and then they have the Tridentine Mass at the Basilica at the end of the route. Let's hope that goes forward. There's apparently some liturgical rigmarole happening between the Vatican and the organizers and the French bishops of that event. Father, do you want to speak to that at all?
Well, it's tolerated by the Vatican when it should be promoted. This is really a sad thing. I mean, in what other organization, when you have young, enthusiastic people with children wanting to make a sacrificial walk over 2 days, what organization would place restrictions on it to make it more difficult? It's an organization that's lost its sense of its purpose. So, reality imposes itself. These people who come to pray are not there as actors or paid. They're there because they want to be there.
Right.
Let's not make life difficult for them.
Yeah. I want to move on to something else. Bob, this is a curious story, and with Pope Leo talking about AI, Catholic Answers, which is a group that for decades has answered concerns about the faith, they recently launched an AI priest online named Father Justin. I guess Father Jerry was already taken. And this didn't go well. Things went sideways when Father Justin began to tell people, "I'm as real as the faith we share." And then he claimed to live in Assisi. He also told questioners that they could baptize a baby in Gatorade. Worse, Father Justin heard someone's confession via X. This is the text chain. Catholic Answers has since defrocked Father Justin, and like so many former clergymen, he's now known as Justin the Theologian. But I'm not kidding. Bob, I'm not sure we're ready for this AI clergy, nor do we need it.
Yeah, I think Catholic Answers is a wonderful organization, and I don't know why they decided to do this sort of thing. I mean, it kind of unfortunately reproduced the horrors that you expect when, some slightly heterodox priest starts reading crazy theology, and the next thing you know, he's laicized. I'm surprised this bot isn't married to another bot.
Father, your reaction.
Yeah, well, I would say I need this like I need a gaping head wound. I mean, this is one of the worst things you could possibly do, is turn religion into a computer-animated game in which a priest is spouting nonsense. No, I mean, we live in this world where people dress up like cartoon characters and expect us to think it's normal. Let's get back to real people doing real things.
I agree. The tangible, that human contact, this is why God, in his wisdom, left a chain of men to continue the faith, and why we have a new pope, and why we have parents, because you need that human contact. God came and incarnated in a human being so that we could have that personal touch. I hate this AI, computer-generated replacement in almost every aspect of life, but particularly when it comes to moral guidance and life lessons that you need. Very dangerous territory. I'm glad they defrocked Father Justin, and I hope we don't hear from him again. Posse, thank you for being here. And if you want more of the Arroyo Grande, and who doesn't, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or Arroyo Grande Podcast, wherever you get yours. On behalf of Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, till the Posse rides again, stay in the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.